All right, hello and welcome to today's Middle East Policy Forum event, A More Sustainable Future, Tunisia's Climate and Energy Challenges. I'm Graham Cornwell. I am the Assistant Dean for Research at the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University, and I will be moderating our discussion today. The Middle East Policy Forum is actually one of the many event series we have at the Elliott School, and specifically one housed at our Institute for Middle East Studies. This will be our second Tunisia event this year, actually, and we featured events as well, Libya, the relationship between Afghanistan and the Gulf, and we have an event on the World Cup in Qatar coming up on March 22nd as well. So please stay tuned, and you'll see notices for these. Before we begin, I want to just a couple important thank yous. First, to the Institute for Middle East Studies itself for their support of the Policy Forum. Second, of course, to ExxonMobil for their generous sponsorship of the Policy Forum this series. And then finally to Rachel Schaefer for all her help organizing our events this year. So we have a 1-hour event and 3 distinguished panelists. So I'm going to do a pretty quick and mainly ceremonial introduction of our 3 panelists, and then we'll turn right to the questions. I just want to remind you all, please submit your questions in the chat, and we'll hopefully get to them. I would love to have some audience questions come in, and thank you so much for joining us. So first we have Achref Chibani. Achref is a visiting scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center, International Center for in Washington, a Tunisian journalist, a researcher, and civil society activist whose core areas of focus are climate change, renewable energies, and environmental protection. Achref is also an early career researcher representative at the MENA Social Policy Network and an affiliate of our Institute for Middle East Studies. Second, we have Dr. Hanne Knaepen. She is the head of Green Transitions and Climate Action Workstream at the European Center for Development Policy Management. She specializes in climate change adaptation within the context of Europe-Africa relations, with a strong focus on agri-food systems and climate finance. Dr. Knaepen is also a visiting lecturer at the Sebo College of International Relations and Diplomacy in Accra. And then finally, we have Dr. Adel Ben Youseff, an international expert on climate change, green economy, and energy transition. He's worked for many international institutions, including the African Development Bank, the UN Development Program, the European Union, and the World Bank. He was a negotiator on behalf of Tunisia during COP 23, 24, 25, and 26. And Dr. Ben Youseff is also professor of economics at the Université Côte d'Azur and a member of the CNRS, I should say CNRS, research laboratory. So we'll get started, but please do remember to post your questions in the chat, and thank you to our panelists for joining us today. I want to start with a basic question to sort of all 3 panelists to help lay the foundations of our discussion. What do you see as Tunisia's biggest challenge as it pertains to climate change? And Achref, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Graham. I think it's complicated to reduce climate challenges down to 1. But if I must choose, then I believe that the biggest challenge Tunisia faces in relation to climate change is the sparse water resources, which led to creating a crippling water crisis in the country. Tunisia, at the very top of Africa, is one of the driest Mediterranean countries and is characterized by limited water resources. The variability of the climate under the Mediterranean influence in the north and under the Saharan influence in the south make rainfall at the same time scarce and unequally distributed in space and time. Also, I would like to mention here that a disproportionate share of the country's water is also directed to the capital, coastal regions, and large cities. For instance, despite being home to most of Tunisia's fresh water supply, the Northwest suffers shortages in the summer. In 2016, for example, water was reportedly cut from rural areas during the summer, while taps were kept on the richer tourist north. People living in rural areas such as Sajnan in the governorate of Bizerte, for instance, despite being 10 times richer in water resources than the national average, encounter difficulty accessing safe drinking water. Also, over the last decade, Tunisia has achieved considerable success in expanding access to both water and sanitation services, but challenges remain. The growth of the urban population has put immense pressure on water reserves. According to the World Resources Institute, Tunisia will be one of the most water-stressed countries in 2040. In 2014, I remember the World Bank described water scarcity as a development challenge for Tunisia, dealing with climate change, urbanization, and growing demands from industry and agriculture.
Ashraf, thank you for that. Hanne, let's turn to you.
Okay, thank you, Graham, for the question. Thank you also for inviting me. So I think, like, I would agree with Achref that it's very difficult to pin it down to one key challenge, and I've looked at climate risks and climate impacts in Tunisia from a food perspective. So from the perspective of agri-food systems, of course, you have, like Achref was saying, also pressure on cities. There is also a big challenge on the tourism sector. But if we look at the climate risks to agri-food systems in Tunisia, I think this is quite important because the agricultural sector constitutes between 10 and 14% of GDP to the country, and there are many people employed in this sector. So you have, on the one hand, the climate impacts on the national food system, on olive production, on the wheat sector, for which a lot of water is being used. A lot of rainwater also. This, we see, according to climate projections, this will decline in the future. So people will use more groundwater, which is already in very scarce supply for irrigation, among others. So there is a lot of pressure on national food supply. But at the same time, it is a really important factor, is the fact that Tunisia is so import dependent for cereals, especially wheat, from other countries. And so then we talk about transboundary climate impacts. So climate impacts happening in third countries, from where Tunisia imports the main, like more than 60% actually of its wheat comes from countries like Ukraine, unfortunately, and in this case now also Russia, France, the US. So if you have any now climate impacts or any other types of impacts that reduce availability, this of course leads to makes Tunisia more vulnerable. And then I think it is, and this I can elaborate later in the discussion on that, I think there are many reasons for that make it difficult for Tunisia to build resilience and to adapt to climate risks. But let me stop here. We can continue talking about that. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Adel, to you, the biggest climate challenge kind of facing Tunisia.
Thank you very much, Graham, for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity to explain the risks and challenges in Tunisia. According to me, I share entirely what has been said already, but I think that the biggest challenge is its energy security. And Tunisia needs to ensure its energy from renewable energies. And we have so many delays in our way of dealing with that. The energy transition is not in place. We have only 3% of the energy coming from renewable energies. And given the fact that the resources are scarce in Tunisia and we are importing our energy from abroad, we have this problem to secure the energy transition in order to move forward. And one of the problems linked to this is climate finance, because in order to challenge this, we need to mobilize finance. And as you know, for example, Tunisia is targeting to reduce its energy intensity by 45%. In order to do so, we have unconditional part, which is 30% of this decrease will be our problem. So we can finance this. But the other part is the conditional to the availability of climate finance. Unfortunately, in order to make this energy transition, we need to mobilize this, and we have, for now, we have not secured this kind of finance in order to move forward. So for me, the problem of the energy and moving to renewable energy are the key problem for the development of Tunisia and for its sustainability, and in order to challenge climate change challenge in the future. So I think really that we need to secure this climate finance in order to make this transition happen in the future.
Thank you for that. So I mean, three different answers, but I think some overlap that hopefully we can get to as we continue today. So I want to ask one more kind of question to all three of you to weigh in on. And you've again touched on it a little bit, but how is Tunisia, sort of unique in matters pertaining to climate, energy, the environment within North Africa? And how is the Tunisian context unique? Or maybe even across the Mediterranean basin in comparison to other Mediterranean countries. And again, Achref, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Graham. I think climate change challenges, including frequent and intensive extreme weather events, are increasingly affecting small countries. Tunisia is relatively small compared to its neighboring countries, which are Libya and Algeria. Just for the American audience, Tunisia is slightly larger than the US state of Georgia. However, of all North African countries, Tunisia has the longest Mediterranean coastline, making it susceptible to subtropical climatic condition, which defines the Mediterranean climate. No wonder the country experiences typical long, dry, hot season and rainy, mild, cold season. Tunisia is experiencing an inequality between the privileged coastal region and the marginalized interior area, which have been aggravated by the unbalanced regional development policy adopted since the independence. In fact, more than 70% of Tunisia's population now live along the country's north and east coast. In addition, the sectors on which the economy of the country is based were identified as the most vulnerable to climate change: water, agriculture, coastal, and tourism, as Hanne said. So 2/3 of the country is arid to semi-arid, making agriculture and water supply vulnerable to the predicted climate changes.
Thank you. Hanne, on to you. What makes Tunisia unique?
Well, I would echo a lot of what Achref has been saying. It has to do with the location of Tunisia in between the intertropical regions in the south and then the more moderate regions in the northern hemisphere, the long Mediterranean coastline, it was just said. I think also there is a wide diversity of climate impact in a country that is really quite small. You have floods, droughts, reduced rainfall, that is all going to happen in quite a short term. The impact also will happen and is already being felt in various sectors that are really important for a country's growth and GDP, such as agriculture, but also tourism. I think, yeah, what also makes Tunisia unique, I think part of this is also will be similar in other countries, but there is really from an agri-food systems perspective, it's quite you would say that it's important because there is a high food import dependency to build kind of a buffer at home and to build a diversified, environmentally sustainable national agri-food system that is less dependent on food systems from abroad, and that can actually be a way to adapt, to build resilience, to reduce vulnerability. And there are, I think, 3 key factors that are barriers to building this type of sustainable agri-food system that is much more adapted to future climate impacts, and they have to do with socioeconomic, governance, and political challenges. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, I would love to follow up on those factors as we continue. Adel, to you, are you there?
Yes. Thank you, Graham. Again,
sure.
What makes I'm 100%. I agree 100% what have been said. Tunisia has 6 varieties of bioclimate. That's mean in a very small territory we have a variety of bioclimate, and this needs a wide variety of adaptation options. That means that we cannot make just 1 or 2 options for our adaptation, and we need to customize it for the country. And this is very important. This is unique. We need the adaptation policy for our coasts. We need adaptation policies for water management, for energy, for our forests, and also for our oases, because we have these micro ecosystems that we need to manage. So this is put a lot of pressure on Tunisia in order to challenge all this at the same time and to mobilize the finance for this. The other thing I would like to, what is make Tunisia unique, it's Tunisia is experiencing nascent democracy, and this nascent democracy has led to instability, and these instabilities has led to some problems in the way of considering our policies in matter of climate change. And this is, according to me, one important difference with the other countries. And I need to mention this because really for now, what we are seeing is this democracy, this nascent democracy, this instability is translated also in our option of mitigation and adaptation policies.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn to Achref specifically for this next question. And I want to follow up on something you said previously about migration and the impact of climate on migration. Now, in Tunisia, how is climate forcing people to relocate, and what sorts of consequences is this having in the country?
Thank you so much for the question. Yeah, in fact, in Tunisia, like as I said earlier, like the south of Tunisia has the influence of Saharan influence. So this means that, for instance, farmers face a lot of difficulties to cope and also to adapt to these new climate changes. And for instance, in south of Tunisia, for instance, in my city, Tataouine, for instance, as an example, in Tataouine, there are limited local factories that are able to hire unemployed people. Okay, so that's why this means that farmers feel that the work is unprofitable and would like to move to other part of the country to work, not only in farming but also in other sectors. Also, as I said earlier, 70% of the Tunisian population is like in the north coast of Tunisia. This means that there is the kind of internal migration. I think that the question of migration generally is always referred to in Tunisia because of socioeconomic challenges, but also the climate change with less rain forces people and forces farmers to and low-skilled people to move to other places, searching for better opportunities. And I think the situation will be becoming worse in the next few years, because this morning before this webinar, I received another call from another farmer who said to me that I will stop working as an agricultural laborer, and I will move to Sousse, which is a city in the Sahel of Tunis. So looking for another job opportunity, which is something alarming. But the issue is that in Tunisia, for instance, there is a lot of policy papers about migration, but they don't put like the climate as a one phenomenon that they should work on and include it in their adaptation strategies.
Interesting. All right. Thank you for that. A reminder, please. I have plenty of questions myself, but if you have them, please share in the chat. Next, I'll turn to Hanne again. You've outlined a little bit how poor governance in Tunisia, is one of the primary kind of climate-related development risks. On the flip side of that, how can good governance help make, for example, the agriculture sector more resilient?
Yeah, very good question. I think there are various ideas I would have on that. So it's true that in the work I did so far in the research, there was poor governance and also the incoherence of policies in Tunisia at national government level due to divided government coalitions and also the interest and the power of certain interest groups are reasons for the lack of ability to build resilience, what ways to improve this and why good governance is so important and how this can be done. I think what you see is that there is, for example, not at the government, at the level of the line ministries, there is no one who has this particular like oversight or a role to build resilience within the country. There is one focal point on climate within the Ministry of Agriculture, who decides then on water, but this is also not the most, of course, Ministry of Agriculture, not the most powerful ministry. What you see, what is also very important for adaptation is that there is the power at the local level for communities, for farmers and so on to make decisions, also to have access to finance. Adel already spoke about the importance of climate finance. What you see is that since the decentralization process since 2014 with the new constitution that actually took up climate change as a permanent feature, which is a good point. But despite this decentralization process, the reality shows that local authorities, also at the city level, community or village level and so on, they don't have the power, financial power and so on, the voice to adapt. And so that's a really big issue. Everything is quite top down. Then another factor I want to bring up is actually it's related to that you have, and I think Achref already referred to that, you have this issue of inequalities between city like Tunis and also cities along the coastline, where there is also industry, where there is tourism, and the more like the interior rural areas, where people are facing a lot of issues. Also, they are moving away often from farming life. There's a lot of unemployment. And so you have these diminished agricultural livelihoods in remote areas. And I think I want to add actually a third factor that I think it's important, and it's also something that should be discussed when trying to improve governance and work towards more good governance. I think it has to do with a general national market and trade system that is very strongly geared towards exports, especially olive oil, but also citruses and dates and so on, towards the European markets. And for these monoculture farming systems that often deplete the soil, they're not diversified, have been set up. And there are only a few people who are actually gaining from these systems. And also, of course, a lot of water is being used, so causing also soil degradation. And so this has been a business priority, political priority, to focus a lot on export-oriented agriculture. But at the same time, it causes a lack of food self-sufficiency. So I think, yeah, it's another reason for poor governance has to do with decisions on how to use agricultural land. Even the wheat that is being produced in Tunisia, as I heard from Tunisian farmers, also and people from syndicates, it says that they are using irrigation systems, groundwater, in quite an unsustainable way. So that's problematic in the short term and in the long term. Thanks.
Thank you. Adel, I want to turn to you and follow up on your climate finance question. I mean, what are some of the obstacles that are going to keep Tunisia from reaching the climate, the sort of levels of climate finance it needs?
It's a big question, this. Let me start by saying that, let me clarify. We have no common understanding of climate finance at international level. That means that it's one of our key problems in the process of a negotiation right now. And in COP27 and 28, we need to address these questions.
So one of the questions is actually coming in the chat, and I think now seems like, oh, Adel, did we lose you? Yes. Okay. Well, we'll put a pin. Yep, still frozen. Okay, we'll put that on hold and we'll be back to Adel in just a moment. Let's go back to, I mean, maybe we could step out a little bit and talk about,
that for climate finance for some.
Adel, we've lost you.
Is it okay?
You know, it sounds a little better.
Yes,
maybe we'll start over at the beginning of the question, if you don't mind. Apologies, everyone. Zoom is wonderful for so many things, including having panelists that are in Brussels and Washington, D.C. and in Gadis, Tunisia at the same time, but sometimes we have our challenges. Adel, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, okay. My question is,
Still struggling with your audio. We'll take a little, just put your response on pause and we'll give it a minute or two and come back to you with that question. I want to ask a question to the other panelists while we put that on hold. And it's just about the political situation and how that's impacting climate. I mean, I guess specifically, how do climate challenges overlap with political challenges, whether that's sort of the instability of the past few years as new democratic institutions have tried to develop, or people have tried to build new democratic institutions, or even in the past kind of 6 months, and this sort of increased authoritarianism under President Said. Achref or
yes.
Hanne, if you want to take, yeah, please.
Yes, for me, this is like a quite sensitive question, but what I would like to say is that Tunisia, which is considered as the successful model of the Arab Spring, has all the can continue to have like a kind of energy transition despite all the political instability. I think that at the end we will manage we will manage to ensure our energy transition, because Tunisia has witnessed growing deficits in its energy balance, for instance, over the past 2 decades. And this this trend is largely the result of increasing energy consumption in all economic sectors, coupled with the decline of the hydrocarbon production. I think that, but I think also that there is, despite the recent reforms over the past years to encourage the involvement of the private sector and to accelerate the realization of national objectives, when we talk about climate change and renewable energies, there are also several barriers that continue to hold back more accelerated renewable deployment. I think it's important to have like a kind of institutional framework, because current procedures for the execution of renewable energy projects involve several ministries and public institutions, in addition to the Ministry of, for instance, Industry, Energy and Mines. And there are a lot of institutions dealing with lands, agriculture, finance, planning, and environment. So I think it's important to clarify institutional responsibilities and strengthen institutional capacities. I think that it's okay that we have like a kind of political instability, but I think that we have a powerful civil society. We have also a good media outlets in Tunisia. I think we can manage to have these kinds of reforms in the near future.
Hanne, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think I've already mentioned the decentralization process that started, which is a positive thing, but it hasn't been so efficient so far, and that's to the detriment of effective adaptation and resilience building. Then another point, what I see that politically, And also very connected to that, the industry and private sector interests show that overall the climate response has been stronger in the energy sector. So less attention has gone to adaptation, to the need to finance adaptation. And what is interesting, I think, is if you compare the first NDC, so the nationally determined contribution of Tunisia, and then the new one that was submitted before COP26, end of last year, you see that when it comes to adaptation, there was the first NDC said that the support for adaptation should be entirely borne by the international community entirely. So no national resources going to adaptation. When you compare this to some sub-Saharan African countries like Kenya, this is different. They also commit to use their own national resources. But now the latest NDC of Tunisia said that it's a significant contribution is required from the international community, and they will also use their own national and private resources, which is necessary, I think. And you can, of course, have a discussion on common but differentiated responsibilities. I think that's very important, but the reality shows that it's also necessary to use, in my opinion, to use your own resources. Also, I would be curious to hear Adel's opinion on this, as he's so involved with the COPs. But that's like overall my assessment is that more than in agriculture, more than adaptation, the climate response has been emphasized in the energy sector, also because there is often, if you invest in energy, there is a higher financial return compared to investing in adaptation.
Interesting. Adel, do you want to chime in? Are you back?
Yes, I'm back. I think it's good like this. I would like
Great.
to highlight the fact that for the finance questions, we have two dimensions. The first one, as I said, there is a historical responsibilities, and this historical responsibility need to be in somewhere we need to deal with it, because we cannot fund the entire NDC. The NDC requires around 20 billion US dollar, and we cannot finance by our own resources. Of course, we are not waiting. Already our agriculture people in the cities are adapting. They are adapting themselves because the change is already here and people are acting already now. And we are not counting this option and how they cost, but we need more resources. So one of the resources needs to come from this historical responsibility. We don't know how, but we need it. And the second part is private sector involvement. So we have this weakness in Tunisia to consider climate change as the question of public and only public. And we need to involve more the private sector, involve more the banks. That's what we are doing now. And I think that one of the problems in the energy transition is that we have not involved the private sector sufficiently in order to do so. And our target was about 30% of renewable energy by 2030. But we know that we will have around 23-24% at 2030 because we have taken all these delays in our plan. And one aspect of this delay is the non-involvement of private sector since the starting of the programs. But now we are changing the paradigm and we are involving them more and more. The last part is also the instability, the political instability, because we have this green transition, this climate transition needs leadership. And if we have not this leadership and if you have this instability, it causes delay and we have not consistency in our policies. And this is what we have been observed last years. So we need more leadership and more stability in order to do our option in terms of mitigation and adaptation.
Thank you. So some questions are coming in on the chat, and I thought we'd turn to them. We touched a little bit on climate finance, but one question here is, what has kept Tunisia so dependent on food imports? How have trade agreements played a role in that?
Yeah,
Achref,
go ahead.
Please. No, go ahead, Achref.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so Tunisia rely on like import 70% of its grains from Ukraine, generally because, for instance, farmers feel that they don't receive enough incentives from the government. A lot of because we are just we mentioned here that we are importing a specific grain that we don't produce in Tunisia, but it's important to note that farmers feel that the work is becoming non-profitable, and also they don't receive enough because it's farming in Tunisia is somehow subsidized, but they feel that they don't receive the necessary subsidy from the government, there are a lot of times where farmers are protesting and throwing their grains because they said that we will not manage to sell our products or our crops with affordable prices. And this, I think the Ukraine-Russia crisis will be a good opportunity for Tunisia to focus more on supporting farmers in the country, to provide the necessary incentives, because I think very soon we will need to we will need to import the majority of our grains from overseas, particularly that we cannot rely on the Black Sea area at this stage.
Thanks, Hanne. Adel, would you like to chime in there? Hanne, I'm sure you have some perspective on this one.
Yeah, well, of course, I'm not Tunisian, but speaking for this research about this, I understand that it has to do with trade agreements, and it basically comes down to cheaper to prices. It's more interesting from a financial perspective to import at a large scale, and we see exactly the same in many West African countries like Senegal, that is sometimes up to 80% dependent on rice imports for its basic staple food. So that's one thing. And then, of course, also what Achref was saying about the lack of subsidies and the lack of investment in a national agricultural system that is flourishing and that is contributing to food self-sufficiency in the country. And there is, I think you also mentioned earlier that there is a lively civil society movement, and this also is the same for the food self-sufficiency movement that is actually fighting for this, for a government also to pay much more attention to smallholders and family agriculture and so on. And also what I said earlier is that a lot of the land, and we know Tunisia is not a huge country, a lot of the land is being used for export crops that are very lucrative, such as olives and olive oil. So I think that's another issue.
Yes. Also, just another point, please, which is what might be the knock-on political, social, and economic effects of grain shortages, because historically food price rises have produced social unrest in the country, such as the bread riots of 1983, because this one precipitated by the IMF and World Bank driven termination of state subsidies on basic food stuff. And later the result of an IMF imposed austerity program. So I think that some have pointed to food price increases as a contributing factor to the 2011 uprisings or revolution. So the possibility of similar social unrest as ordinary citizens face the burden of increasing grain prices cannot be excluded. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm seeing earlier today that the prices in Egypt for loaves of bread have doubled. Obviously, we're seeing pretty quick knock-on effects of what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. Another question has come. Oh, Adel, yeah, please.
Yeah, I would like just to add the small things. First, I'm economist, so what we taught in
that's
economy,
okay. You're welcome.
That's okay. What we taught in economy is for small countries like Tunisia, we need the best policy option is free trade. So we have learned this very early in Tunisia. And we trusted in free trade. That means that we are going to specialize in some things, and for other things where we have not the comparative advantage, we are going to import. But for agriculture, really, there is two problems. The first problem is that with the World Trade Organization, we have not reached an agreement since so many years. So that's, and this is, and the second, we have seen that food security have becoming an increasing thing starting from the, let me say, 2000. That's mean that there is a change of the paradigm in the world. And we have not prepared ourselves sufficiently to this, because our agriculture is based, it lacks two things. First, it lacks technology. We have a very archaic system of, and the second thing is we have small parcels and not sufficient big parcel in order to make the scale economy, etc. So with this, we have not modernized, we have not made our modernization of the economy. And as a consequence, we have trusted in the free trade, and we can import the goods from the, now we need to move forward and to change. And this is not easy. It will not be easy. I don't think that really, because it's lacks of subsidy of incentives, it lacks restructuration. And really, also because if we make these changes, small in matter of scale economy and technology, this will have a social impact. And the social impact is these people who are in the lands and will move the migration. So I think that we are not able to move so fast in this matter of agriculture now.
Okay, thank you. Another question in the chat actually concerns one of Tunisia's neighbors, Libya. And the question is, how can Libya as an energy producing country play a bilateral role with its neighbor in Tunisia? And the question specifically mentions green hydrogen as a possible way for the future. How has Tunisia approached green hydrogen?
Okay.
Let's hear it on Libya. Yeah.
Yeah, I can answer the first part, like which is Tunisia imports most of its energy, and it's unlikely to become energy independent. It imports most of its energy from gas from Algeria. It's true that we have long-lasting relationships between Tunisia and Libya, particularly in southern of Tunisia and the border regions. We have a kind of bilateral trade, but in terms of energy, because the situation in Libya has been unstable over the past decade, so Tunisia at the moment cannot rely on Libya as to import energy, but import the gas, but because we just need the gas, and the gas is available in Algeria. But just I would like to mention here is that Tunisia, there are a lot of people working in oil and gas companies in Libya. Before the uprising or the revolution, it's about I don't know the exact figure, but a lot of people were used to work in Libya. But Tunisia is able to foster its energy relation with Libya, but this requires that there is a kind of stability in the neighboring country. We need the different governments have signed a lot of agreements with the Libyan governments. Particularly that we rely a lot on Libya to absorb some of the unemployers in Tunisia, but I think it's because the situation is remain fragile in Libya. Tunisia at the moment would like to go for the guaranteed option, which is Algeria, because Algeria provides us with affordable prices and it's always available. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, interesting. Anyone else want to chime in on Libya? as an energy partner? Let's Adel, I don't know if you're speaking, but you're muted.
If Hanne don't mind, I can answer this. I think that what we need with Libya, before speaking about hydrogen and green hydrogen, we need interconnection with Libya. We have not interconnection. If we need renewable energy in the system in Tunisia, we need a strong interconnection with Algeria, Libya, and also with Europe. And for now, we are suffering from this in Tunisia, because if you put more and more renewable energy, since the problem of intermittence, you need to have some stable partners that can provide energy if there is some problem. And till now, we have not this interconnection. Second, really, we need the diversification and to see what Libya is going to do in matter of green hydrogen and in matter of renewable energy. We cannot rely on only one partner, because as Achref has said, all the energy is coming from Algeria. And really, we need some diversification in matter of security. But the option of green hydrogen, especially in Algeria and Tunisia, is one important option, especially after the Ukraine-Russia war. And European countries are imagining that the pipelines were transporting now gas can be changed in the pipelines of green hydrogen in the future. And this is a real option. That's mean that we need to invest this. And I have so in the chat that my friend Borhan already is answering. There are so many research in Tunisia addressing these questions. And this is a really very important option for us in Tunisia.
All right, thank you. Yeah, please, Hanne.
I can add something because Adel mentioned Europe, and it's true. What I read is that there is a huge potential for a renewable, for green hydrogen in Tunisia, and Europe is very interested, especially since the Green Deal, and that has been launched in 2019. Europe is very famous for that, but there is at the same time, so there is a lot of potential to export indeed, but we have to also make sure, and I think Tunisians especially, that you're not replicating the same trade system that exists now for agriculture, where you're exporting olives and so on to Europe and using then more degraded, local people use degraded oils for cooking, and you export high quality. So and I hear also from activists in Tunisia that there is a fear that that Europe would actually plunder local resources that would be then again exported. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when talking about Europe-Tunisia trade and renewables.
Thanks, Hanne. So this is the second time that activists and civil society has come up. I want to pose another broad question to all three of you, and that's what is the role for civil society in advocating for better kind of resilience to climate change, I should say, or even helping to implement some of the changes that we're talking about.
Yes, I think there is an important thing to note here is that civil society in Tunisia is more aware of climate change than the government. So here we can distinguish the international organizations in Tunisia like Friedrich Ebert and GEZ. There are a lot of international organizations that are doing great job in reinforcing the capacities of local NGOs, of public sector officials, and also there are also an important local civil society that are raising awareness and organizing climate campaigns in their local communities. So civil society is important in raising awareness and implementing projects in the different governorates of the country. I think it's important. It's important to support the civil society because there is some. I've read that maybe there is some new amendments in law for civil society in Tunisia. I think it's important to support the civil society in Tunisia because it also because there are a lot of organizations that recruit people to work within the civil society, and also they are implementing sustainable projects in their communities. And it's important to, because the civil society is in Tunisia is the most powerful civil society in the Arab world. So it's important to keep this benefit and try to support it so that the civil society is sustainable and get the necessary financial resources to be sustainable.
Hanne, Adel, I know both of you have some interest and expertise in these things.
Yeah, I would actually confirm what Achref has said based on my discussions with people working for CSOs, for civil society organizations. I also noticed that media is also quite free, and journalists are free to express their concerns, but there is always the issue, it seems, that although voices can be loud, they are also blocked at a certain level. So you have the degree to which they can actually change policy, change government, I think that is quite limited. While at the same time, they may indeed be the most powerful in the MENA region, as Achref was saying. But it's about then having an actual impact. And I hear the same also from friends who work, for example, for the UN in Tunisia, that they work with women organizations and so on. But then actual implementation even of projects depends on politicians, and there it's where you often have an issue. That's my perception.
Thank you, Adel. I see you shared your piece here, so why don't you jump in?
I have sent in the chat one of my last publication about the role of NGOs in climate policies in Tunisia. So if someone, I think that really, if you look at the delegation, for example, for the negotiation in the COP26 in Tunisia, the Tunisian delegation, half of it is civil societies and youth. So this is really the real representative of the. And this civil society is very important, and its role is very important in the determination and elaboration of the strategic document. Already they are participating in the elaboration of the option of mitigation, option of adaptation, etc. So they are very involved in the process. They are also involved in the implementation of the policies. If you look at the ground, in some regions, only NGOs are working, not the local authorities. And they know how to work, they know their communities, they know the best option. And also people from international donors, for example, work directly with civil society on these. And lastly, they have a very important role in spreading the awareness and education of climate change for the local communities. And this is also very important. So the NGOs are a very important actor in the climate policies in Tunisia, and they are doing well already, but we need to strengthen their capabilities and their role in the future. That's all for now.
Thank you for that. We're a little low on time, but a question has come into the chat, and I want to ask you all. Do you think Tunisia will support shale oil and gas projects in the future?
I think Tunisia's strategy to pursue shale oil and gas seems high risk, given the limited likelihood of investor interest and the environmental concerns already expressed in Tunisia about such moves. Hydraulic fracturing of shale plays or requires large quantities of water and would pollute water resources, which is especially problematic in the water-scarce North African context. In addition, a number of environmental impacts are associated with producing and using shale gas. These include the risk of water contamination from the gas and the possibility of inducing seismic shocks. So because, you know, in its brief commercial history, these factors have generated a large number of studies and considerable controversy. Thanks.
Sure. Anything else on shale and gas projects?
I think that this option will, I was involved in the study about the green transition and energy transition in Tunisia for 2050 in Tunisia. Mm-hmm. And in the past, perhaps we have not considered this because of several factors, but I think that it may be considered in the future if the situation will be worsen in the future with oil and because we have not made our energy transition from the one side. From the other side, we have no resources in matter. We have a debt crisis. And from the other side, we have our own resources in matter of oil and gas are very scarce. So we cannot live without energy. We need to make the green transition. We need to make, but at a certain moment, we will face a problem, and perhaps this option will raise again. I fear that this option will be considered again.
So it would be from a place of kind of desperation almost that this sort of idea would be taken up, a shale project. Yeah, okay. Well, we are almost out of time. I want to thank everybody. I'm very grateful to our panelists who have added some of their more substantial work. So you can, for further reading here in the comments. I think we had a really interesting discussion. I mean, Tunisia, a relatively small place, but with a very diverse set of environmental challenges that are connected to what's going on around the world, specifically in the Ukraine right now, Ukrainian conflict with Russia and its neighbors and instability in Libya as well. Thank you to Hanne, Adel, and Achref for your contributions. Very grateful, and thank you to our audience for joining us today and sharing your questions as well. I want to just,
yeah, thank you so much, Graham, and I hope the input was of relevance to the audience. And have a good morning, afternoon, or good night, wherever you are. So.
Indeed, yes. Thanks to our panelists from Tunisia, Brussels, and Washington. Please stay tuned. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for your attention. Thank you also for the invitation. I really enjoyed the discussion. So, thanks.
Terrific to have you. Yeah. Please stay tuned. We have another Middle East Policy Forum event coming on March 22nd, looking at the World Cup in Qatar and its regional ramifications for the first World Cup in the Middle East, in the Arab world, and should be a really interesting conversation. Thanks again to the panelists. Thank you to Rachel Schaefer for helping organize, and
thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.